Mark Tronson from the Australian Missionary News. I have here with me today John Cleary. Now, John Cleary is very well known to us, ABC Religious Affairs commentator. Now, John, can you tell us something about your early life, please?
Well, I grew up in an ecumenical household. My father's family are Catholic. My mother's family, I guess, could be described as Bush Baptists. You know, they went to church but can't quite remember when. And when I was a kid growing up in inner suburban Carlton in Melbourne, the local kids all went to the Salvation Army Sunday School because that had more things to do than any other Sunday school. So I ended up at the Salvos.
Ended up at the Salvos. Now, when did you actually start with the ABC?
Started with the ABC in 1980. I'd had a couple of jobs. I'd taught school for a year or so. I'd been overseas for a year or so. And then I got a job by referral working in a government department advising a minister, and after a year or so of that I applied for a job with the ABC. It took a little while. The mills of God don't, I think, grind as slow as the ABC. I think I applied for a job in late 1978, December 78. I was interviewed in June 79 and was offered a job in September 79 and started in February 1980. So I remember my road into the ABC.
Okay. Now, did you always do religion?
Yes, I've always done religion in the ABC. When I was at university, I had the opportunity of doing 2 units which were very helpful. One was with Professor Ronald Goldman, whose area of expertise was in children and religion. He'd done a PhD thesis on it and taught just how young people address religious questions. And at the same time, I was doing a side unit in media with Jerzy Terplitz, who later went on to become the head of the Australian Film and Television School. So I had a good sort of background academically. I'd done my first degree in history and philosophy, but moving then into education and media, it seemed a natural transition, really.
Okay, now, folks, a personal confession. I am an avid ABC Radio National listener, and that some of the voices become good friends to you.
They do.
And so your voice is indeed a good friend. So what's this ABC Specialist Religious Unit about?
Well, I found that out myself when I joined. It was a unit started in the days when the ABC, like all public broadcasters, rather than just go for a broad mass audience, would say, no, we'll build our audience up out of all the communities of interest out there, and we'll have specialists in those communities come in and we'll train them how to make programs. And so they will become broadcasters that can convey the information about their community. So you used to have an education department, a science department, a religion department. There are still 2 very big departments that remain in the ABC, of course, specialist departments that everybody is familiar with: sport and rural.
That's the R word, rural. Now,
sport, of course, is the other R word, religion.
Yes,
sport.
Yes, of course. Okay, now, what would be perhaps your two or three most interesting stories?
Well, I think probably the most challenging one for me was going to South Africa, being sent by the ABC to look at the way religion was affecting the transition of government from the apartheid regime to the national government regime. And it was at the time when things were very, very unsettled in South Africa. The day I arrived, 20 people had been killed in the town of Sebokeng, and I had the chance to travel with Bishop Desmond Tutu for 3 or 4 days as he ministered to people in some dreadful circumstances. That and the chance to sit close to Nelson Mandela when he came back to address black lawyers. He was a lawyer himself, and he addressed them for the first time since he'd been released from jail. So some very moving moments there, but the thing that stands out most is in fact meeting with a white South African, a man called Johan Haynes, who was head of the Dutch Reformed Church, or one branch of it, and at the time they were beginning to talk. Johan Haynes was wanting to move towards a resolution of the problem, and I sat with him in his lounge room, which looked out onto a lovely backyard. There's a beautiful glass wall, and we look out into his garden. And 4 days after I did the interview with him, he was murdered, and shot through that very window by people who didn't want to see change in the country. A very brave man. The other, moving away from that sort of high adventure, the interview which I enjoyed most, I think, was Anthony Wedgwood Benn, former British politician who had been accused by Rupert Murdoch of being the most dangerous man in Britain, telling me about how his favourite song was something he'd learnt on his father's knee. Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone.
I've sung that one. Now, was he the son of the famous Ben?
No, that is the famous Ben.
Is that the son?
Anthony Wedgwood Benn. He is now, well, he'd been to his 90s now.
I've seen a doco of him standing up, defending or speaking against the law that Churchill brought in, just regarding protecting just the nation through its not being able to print certain things.
Yes, yes. Yes, he was a staunch defender of civil liberties, but he was also a very staunch defender of moral integrity. He was a very, very... he's probably one of the straightest men I've ever met.
Okay, now, this last question isn't a professional question. It is really a question that's being asked just by many common Christians around the nation. And it's a kind of a philosophical question. And it's that here in our country we have great religious freedom. I am able to comment about the Hindus, I can comment about Islam, I can comment just about the Presbyterians, and then there's discussion. But in many parts of the world that is not allowed. And you'll quickly end up in the slammer or worse. And yet those people can espouse those views here. And so, can you comment about that?
Well, I think that is one of the great privileges of a democratic society. And I think on a program like mine, you want people to actually disagree with each other. Because if everybody agrees, there's no spark in the program.
Sure.
So you want people to disagree with you. So you've got to say, well, what are the limits of tolerance here? And I think it is great to encourage people to dispute, and to dispute in a healthy way. When it crosses the line to abuse, then you've gone too far. Now, to take the point further, people who would, if they were in their own country, operate under a regime that would censor you, that would not allow you to express your religious views in their country, even though they can express their religious views in your country, I think that is a shining example of why we should remain who we are. It's a bit like the Americans over this whole torture business. The argument from Barack Obama and others is, look, the moment we start torturing them, we're the same as them. That's right. We've got nothing to offer. Yes, and I think that's the same in religion. The moment we begin to put others down for their religion, then we've reduced ourselves to that level.
I can vouch, as can many others, that the most wonderful feeling is when that Qantas jet hits our Sydney tarmac again. Because we live
nice to be home.
Yes, we certainly live in a great country. Yeah. Well, John Cleary, we thank you so very much.
Pleasure.
This is Mark Tronson signing off for the Australian Missionary News. That was